The wind howls through the cracks of the old window. Outside, the bitter cold of winter is creeping into the corners of the room, a sharp reminder of how quickly the seasons change. In this house, time feels like it has frozen, but the years keep slipping by, one after another. My name is Angela Williams. I'm 55 years old and I've been walking this path for a long time, but it's never felt longer than tonight. It's a funny thing, how life shifts from the ordinary to the extraordinary, from manageable to unbearable in the blink of an eye. I had been sitting in the worn armchair by the fire, the glow of the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls of my small living room. Jaden, my son, was in his room, studying, or at least that's what I hoped he was doing. He's 16 now, growing up faster than I'd like to admit, but still my little boy in so many ways. The weight of the world rests on my shoulders, and tonight it feels a little heavier. I've spent my whole life working for him, working for us, and I thought just maybe this winter would be a bit easier. But life has a funny way of making you think you've found some peace, only to pull the rug out from under you. And tonight it did just that. The phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the quiet house, and I picked it up with a sense of dread I couldn't explain. It wasn't the normal time for calls, not that I ever received many, and the number on the caller ID wasn't familiar. My heart skipped a beat as I pressed the phone to my ear. Angela? It was the voice of my supervisor at the factory, Mark, a man I had known for years. I had worked with him long enough to sense the unease in his voice. He wasn't calling to check in on me. He wasn't calling to wish me a good evening. I'm afraid there's been some bad news, he continued, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. The factory's closing, effective immediately. I'm sorry, Angela. There's nothing we can do. We're all being let go. I swear, for a moment, time stood still. I could hear the wind howling through the cracks of the window, but it felt like it was miles away, like the world outside had shut down, leaving me in some dark, quiet place. Mark said something else, something about severance pay and unemployment, but I barely registered his words. My mind was spinning. I had worked at the factory for over 10 years. I had put in late nights, long shifts, and worked weekends just to make ends meet. But it never felt like enough. The factory was a steady job, and that meant everything. My hands, calloused and worn from years of hard work, had always found a way to make things stretch, to make sure Jaden had what he needed. But now there was nothing. There was just me standing on the edge of something unknown, something terrifying. I hung up the phone, my fingers trembling. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and there was nothing but darkness below. The thought of Jaden, of telling him that everything we'd worked for, everything I had done, was suddenly gone, it made my chest tighten. I couldn't do it, not yet. Not while I still had a shred of strength left in me. I stood up from the chair, my legs weak beneath me. I walked to the window, my eyes scanning the empty street outside. There was a quiet beauty to the snow falling gently, but all I could feel was the weight of it, like the world was pressing down on me. The house had always been small. I knew that, but it was ours. It had been mine and my late husband's. After he died, it became my refuge, my safe place. It was where Jaden had taken his first steps, where we'd spent Christmases and birthdays, where I had sewn together our lives, one stitch at a time. But tonight, the walls felt like they were closing in on me. There was no more room for hope, no more space for dreams. Just this cold, empty feeling. I made my way to the kitchen, my movements slow and deliberate. The coffee pot had been sitting on the counter, half full for hours. I poured myself a cup, though I didn't really want it. The warmth from the mug did little to ease the chill that had settled inside me. I thought about Jaden, about the promise I had made to him when he was little, that no matter what, I would always take care of him. But now, that promise felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I had nothing left to give. Just then, I heard Jaden's voice from down the hall, faint but unmistakable. I froze. He was talking to someone. I strained to listen, but the words were too muffled. It didn't matter. What mattered was what was coming, what I had to tell him. My heart sank, but I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked down the hallway, my feet heavy with the weight of everything I was about to say. Jaden looked up when I entered his room, his eyes full of hope and youth, a stark contrast to the crushing weight of reality I was carrying. "Mom," he said, a smile creeping up on his face. "You're home early. How was work?" I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to smile back, to tell him everything was fine, that nothing had changed, that we would be okay. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said the only thing I could manage. They're closing the factory, Jaden. I don't have a job anymore. His smile faltered, and for a moment the room felt like it was closing in around us. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. I watched as the light in his eyes dimmed, and I knew then that the world as we knew it had shifted. We sat there in silence for a long time. Neither of us knew what to say next. In that moment, everything felt like it was falling apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But even in the darkest of moments, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. I stood up, confused, wiping my eyes, trying to steady my breath. Who could it be at this hour? I didn't know it then, but that unexpected knock on the door would change everything. The doorbell rang again, pulling me from the silence that had settled over the room. I didn't move at first, unsure whether I should even answer it. It was late, and who would be visiting us at this hour? I glanced at Jaden, who was still sitting on his bed, his eyes downcast, clearly overwhelmed by the news. He didn't move either. We were both suspended in a moment of stillness, as if time itself was holding its breath. The doorbell rang once more, a little more insistently this time. I walked toward the door slowly, the weight of the evening pressing down on my shoulders. As I reached for the handle, my heart started to beat faster. Who could this be? I opened the door and was met with the unexpected sight of a man standing on the porch, a tall figure with broad shoulders, his breath visible in the cold air. He was dressed in a heavy winter coat, his features sharp and clean-cut. His presence was imposing in a way that immediately made me feel small, but his smile, warm and genuine, softened the tension in his eyes. "Angela Williams?" he asked, his voice low but confident. I hesitated. "Yes, can I help you?" "I'm Richard Turner," he said, extending a hand. "I've been trying to reach you for a while. I know this is a bit unusual, but I wanted to talk to you about something important." At first, I was taken aback. Richard Turner. The name didn't immediately ring a bell, but then again, my world had been so insular lately. Work, Jaden, the endless cycle of getting by. I wasn't really keeping track of the larger world outside. "I'm sorry, but I don't think I know you," I said cautiously. "How did you get my address?" Richard looked a little surprised at my bluntness, but it didn't seem to faze him. "I understand your skepticism," he said. "I met you a few weeks ago during a community outreach event downtown. I work with some of the local charities, and you were there, helping out with the food drive. I saw you, and I couldn't help but notice your work ethic. It was inspiring, really." I frowned, trying to recall the event he mentioned. The food drive had been one of the few things I'd done outside of my normal routine. I remembered the hustle of it all, the endless stacking of cans, the way my hands had ached by the end of the day. But I didn't remember him, of course. There had been so many people there. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't remember you." Richard didn't seem bothered by my lack of recognition. He smiled again, but this time there was something else in his expression, something more sincere, almost urgent. "I know this sounds strange, but I've been following up with some of the people I met that day. I believe you're someone who might need a bit of help right now." My stomach churned. It was hard to tell if his words were meant as charity or if there was something more at play here. I wasn't the kind of person who took handouts, especially from someone I didn't know. My pride had always kept me going, even when the days felt like they were slipping through my fingers. But the way he was looking at me, almost like he saw something I hadn't realized myself, left me feeling a little too exposed. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice coming out more defensively than I intended. "I'm fine, we're fine." Jaden had started to get up from his bed, moving toward the door with cautious steps. He looked at me, then back at Richard, clearly trying to size him up. Richard's gaze shifted to Jaden, his smile widening as he noticed the young man's presence. "Your son?" he asked, nodding toward Jaden with a warmth that made me feel a little more at ease. "Yes," I said, glancing over at Jaden. "This is Jaden." Richard extended a hand toward him, and Jaden hesitated for just a moment before shaking it. "I've heard a lot about you, Jaden. Your mother has told me about how hardworking you are, how dedicated you are to your studies." Jaden didn't respond right away, just offering a small, wary smile. His face was still shadowed with the weight of the news I had just given him. but I saw a flicker of something else, a curiosity, maybe a glimmer of hope. He wasn't used to people offering praise without expecting something in return. Look, I know this might be out of the blue, Richard said, his voice softening, but I'm involved with a few local projects, and I think I might be able to offer some assistance. I've been working on a fund to help support people who have fallen on hard times, particularly those in situations like yours. I know it's difficult, especially with everything that's going on at the factory. My heart skipped at the mention of the factory. There it was again, the reminder of everything I had just lost, the loss that still hadn't fully sunk in. Richard's words seemed to pull at that raw wound in me, and for a moment, I felt vulnerable, exposed in a way I hadn't since the day my husband passed. What do you mean help? I asked, my voice tight. What exactly are you offering? Richard paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. I know you've worked hard your whole life, Angela, and I know the struggle you're facing now, finding work, trying to make sure Jaden's future doesn't get lost in all of this. I'm offering you the chance to not have to do it alone. I stared at him for a long moment, unsure of how to respond. I had been doing this alone for so long, fighting to keep Jaden and myself afloat, even when it felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. The thought of letting someone help felt foreign, almost shameful, like admitting defeat. But something in Richard's eyes, in the way he spoke, made me wonder if maybe this time was different. Jaden spoke then, his voice low but sharp. What do you want in return? I shot him a look, but Richard only smiled. I'm not asking for anything. You don't have to owe me anything. I just want to help, that's all. I didn't know what to think. This wasn't the way I had planned to deal with things. I had always believed that if I worked hard enough, if I pushed through the pain, I could make things work. But lately, that hadn't been enough. Everything I had built seemed to be falling apart, and Jaden was starting to notice. I don't know what you're offering, I said, my voice quieter now, but I don't think we need charity. Richard's smile faded, but he didn't seem offended. Instead, he nodded slowly, understanding. I get it, I truly do, but think about it, Angela. You don't have to carry this weight alone anymore. There's no shame in accepting help, especially when it's offered with genuine care. You've spent your whole life doing for others. Let someone do for you now. His words lingered in the air, hanging there like a question I hadn't been able to answer. I turned back to Jaden, whose expression had softened, a slight furrow between his brows. He wasn't sure what to make of Richard either, but he wasn't dismissing the offer out of hand. Maybe we should think about it, Jaden said slowly, looking at me for confirmation. I nodded, though my mind was still swirling. It was a lot to take in, too much to process in one night. But in the pit of my stomach, a small part of me, one I hadn't felt in a long time, wondered if maybe Richard was offering more than just financial assistance. Maybe, just maybe, he was offering us a chance to rebuild. All right, I said finally, looking back at Richard. We'll think about it, but we'll need time. Take all the time you need, Richard said, stepping back from the door. I'll check in with you soon. He gave me one last smile before he turned and walked away into the night, leaving us standing there, unsure of what the future held, but at least, for the first time in a long while, not quite so alone. The cold air rushed in as I closed the door behind Richard, the soft click of the latch echoing in the quiet house. I stood there for a moment, the weight of the conversation still hanging in the air, feeling as heavy as the night itself. Jaden hadn't said much after Richard left, but I could see the uncertainty written all over his face. He was quiet, thinking, probably trying to make sense of the stranger who had shown up on our doorstep, offering something I wasn't sure we deserved. I went to the kitchen to pour myself another cup of coffee, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't just the cold creeping through the house, it was the uncertainty that seemed to swirl around me like a fog. Everything felt like it was in flux. The factory was gone. My job, my stability vanished. And now here was a man, a stranger, offering help. He said it wasn't charity. He said it was genuine care. But how could I trust that? How could I trust anyone when everything I had built had crumbled to the ground? Jaden eventually came into the kitchen, leaning against the door frame, his arms crossed. I could tell he was still processing everything. His silence wasn't like his usual quiet moments. This was different. This was a weight he was carrying, just like me. I set the mug down on the counter and turned to face him. Mom, he said, his voice steady but hesitant. What do you think? Should we take him up on it? I sighed and rubbed my temples, trying to push away the tiredness that had taken root in my bones. I don't know, Jaden. I don't know if we can trust someone like him. Jaden didn't move, didn't even blink. He simply watched me, his face as serious as I'd ever seen it. But he seems like he really wants to help. I mean, I don't know why, but I didn't get a bad vibe from him. He just seemed like he wanted to make things better. I wanted to argue. I wanted to push back against the idea of accepting help from a stranger, but I couldn't, not entirely. Jaden was right. Richard didn't act like the usual kind of benefactor who expected something in return. He didn't seem like a man trying to buy us or make us feel indebted. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this was too good to be true. But you're right, I said finally, my voice softer now. We need time to think about it. Jaden nodded and went back to his room without another word. He didn't push, didn't demand answers, but I could tell he was wrestling with the same questions that were clouding my mind. What if this was our way out? What if, just maybe, Richard wasn't like everyone else? The thought flickered like a distant star, too faint to latch onto, but still there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Richard. Every time I went through the motions of my daily life, cooking dinner, helping Jaden with his schoolwork, cleaning the house, I found myself wondering about his offer. I had never liked asking for help, never wanted to burden anyone with my problems. But that night, after Richard left, something inside me had shifted. The hard edge of independence that had kept me going all these years felt less like a shield and more like a wall. Maybe it was time to let it down just a little. A week passed, and Richard's words kept echoing in my mind. The thought of not having to worry about our future, about Jaden's future, kept me awake at night. I thought about what it would feel like to not have to fight every day just to survive, just to scrape by. I thought about the possibility of Jaden not having to work twice as hard just to make ends meet. He deserved better than this life I'd given him. He deserved a chance to dream, to believe in something bigger than just survival. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep pushing Jaden to be strong when I didn't even know how to be strong myself. So I made up my mind. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard's number, my hand shaking as the phone rang. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me, waiting for me to make a decision that would change everything. Angela? Richard's voice was warm and familiar when he answered. It's good to hear from you. How are you? I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. I've been thinking about your offer. I think we could use the help. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the faintest sound of his breath, as if he too had been waiting for this moment. Are you sure? There's no rush. You don't have to decide now. I'm sure, I said. I can't keep doing this on my own, Richard, and Jaden. He needs to know that we don't have to carry this weight alone. I understand, Richard said softly. And you don't have to. I'm here to help, Angela. I want to help. I closed my eyes, allowing his words to settle into my chest like a bomb. There was a part of me still afraid, afraid of opening up, of trusting someone who wasn't family, but there was another part of me that felt the weight lift just a little. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel something that resembled hope. Thank you, I said, my voice quieter now, more fragile than I'd intended. Thank you for offering us a chance. I don't know what comes next, but we'll take that first step. I'll be by tomorrow, Richard said. We'll talk about what happens next. When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, holding the phone in my hands. The silence that followed felt different, quieter, but not in a bad way. I had made a choice, and now the path ahead, though uncertain, felt just a little clearer. Jaden came into the room later that evening. He was still quiet, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even a hint of relief. You called him? He asked, his voice cautious. I nodded. Yes, we're going to take him up on his offer. We'll talk more tomorrow. Jaden looked at me, then nodded slowly. I think this could be good for us, Mom, really good. I smiled, but the smile felt different this time. It wasn't just for Jaden, it was for me too. Maybe, just maybe, we were going to be all right. That night after Jaden had gone to bed, I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The stars above were hidden by clouds, but even the clouded sky held a kind of beauty. I couldn't see what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, I was willing to find out. Tomorrow was a new day, and with it, the promise of something more. The next morning came too quickly, the gray light of dawn creeping through the edges of the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I had hardly slept, my mind tangled in 100 thoughts. Richard's words from last night echoed in my head, but they didn't sound as reassuring as they had in the moment. What was I really doing? Accepting help from a man I barely knew. Trusting someone who seemed to want to make a difference, but was that even possible? Was I ready to let go of my pride, to admit that I couldn't do it all by myself anymore? I moved through my morning routine as mechanically as I could. Coffee, toast, a quick glance at the bills piled on the counter. Too many to count, all of them needing attention. I was trying to hold it together, trying to convince myself that everything would be okay. But the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know if we were taking the right step. All I knew was that we couldn't keep going like this. By the time Richard arrived, I had cleaned up the kitchen, made sure Jaden was dressed and ready for school, and put on a brave face. I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince myself or him, but either way, I had to act like I was in control. When I opened the door to let him in, I felt a knot twist in my stomach. He stood there, just as composed as the night before, his dark coat pulled tight against the cold. "Morning, Angela." He greeted me with a smile as though this was just another regular visit, but I saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of understanding. He knew this wasn't just another visit, he knew he was offering us something big. "Good morning," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, and I hoped it was convincing. Richard stepped into the house, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze lingered for a moment on the small living room, the threadbare couch, the modest decor. I could feel the weight of his judgment, though I didn't let it show. It wasn't that I cared about impressing him, I just didn't want him to think that we were helpless, that we couldn't survive without someone else's handout. "It's a nice place," he said after a brief pause, his tone casual, as if trying to make me feel more comfortable. "Cozy, I like it." I nodded, not knowing how to respond. I had always thought of this house as a sanctuary, as a place that kept us safe. But now, in the light of Richard's scrutiny, it felt small. Too small for what we were facing. The space seemed to shrink, pushing in on me, reminding me that we were running out of room to breathe. "I made some coffee," I said, leading him toward the kitchen. I figured the more normal I could make this, the easier it would feel. "Would you like some?" "Please," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. I'm not much of a morning person, but I could use a cup. I moved to the coffee pot, the comforting sounds of brewing coffee filling the space between us. It was strange how quickly the silence grew. It was a silence filled with so many unspoken words, so many things I couldn't say out loud. Things like how I felt like I was drowning, like I was constantly treading water and never quite getting anywhere. "I've been thinking about what you said," Richard said after a moment, his voice calm, yet there was an undercurrent of something more serious. "About your situation. I know it's hard, Angela, and I want you to know you don't have to go through this alone." I didn't answer right away. I focused on pouring the coffee, avoiding his gaze, my hands suddenly trembling. I knew what he was offering, but the truth was I was scared. What would it mean for me to accept this help? Was I really ready to depend on someone else? I handed him the coffee, trying to steady my hands. He took it with a nod of thanks, sipping it slowly, his eyes never leaving me. "You've been doing everything you can for so long," he continued, his voice steady like a calm anchor in the storm. "But I think it's time for you to let someone else help. It doesn't mean you're weak, Angela, it means you're human." The words hung in the air, their weight settling deep in my chest. I had heard that all my life. "You're strong, Angela. You can do it." From my parents, from my friends, from every person who'd seen me struggle but never truly understood the toll it took. I was human, but the word felt foreign now, like I had forgotten what it meant to be human. I don't know if I can trust this," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you." Richard didn't flinch, didn't look away. He simply met my gaze with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I didn't. "You don't have to trust me yet, Angela, but I'll prove it to you. I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm offering you a chance, a way out of this cycle." I sat down across from him, my coffee cooling in front of me. The silence between us deepened, but this time it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt necessary, like we were both taking a breath, trying to gather the courage to move forward. Jaden entered the kitchen then, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at Richard, his face cautious but polite. There was still a wariness in his eyes, and I couldn't blame him. I wasn't sure what to say to him either. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if Richard was the key to our future or just another stranger passing through our lives. "Good morning, Jaden." Richard greeted him with a warm smile, and Jaden nodded in return, his gaze flicking between the two of us. "Morning," Jaden mumbled, still unsure how to react to this stranger in our home. "You ready for school?" I asked him, trying to keep things as normal as possible. I didn't want him to feel the weight of this conversation, but I could tell he already felt it. "Yeah," Jaden said, shrugging. He didn't seem to want to talk any more than he had to, and I didn't push it. I could see the questions in his eyes, the confusion and hesitation. It was the same way I felt. "I'll walk you to the bus stop," I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. Jaden didn't protest, and neither did Richard. The air in the house felt thick with unspoken words, but sometimes silence was the only thing you could give. As we walked outside, the cold hit me harder than I expected. The wind seemed to slice through me, but it wasn't just the winter chill. It was the uncertainty of the future, the fear of what lay ahead. I walked beside Jaden, feeling his presence next to me, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what came next. I didn't know if Richard's offer would change our lives. I didn't know if it was the right decision. But as the bus pulled up, I turned to Jaden, who was looking at me with a mixture of concern and hope. "Mom, are we really going to do this?" he asked, his voice quiet, but the weight of the question was clear. I didn't have an answer, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure: we couldn't keep doing this alone. "We'll figure it out, Jaden," I said, pulling him into a hug. "One step at a time." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we would be okay. The following days passed in a haze of decisions, uncertainties, and quiet moments that felt much heavier than they should have. Richard's offer still lingered in the back of my mind, like a whisper I couldn't quite ignore. It wasn't that I was afraid to accept his help. It was the fear of what it would mean for us, what it would mean for me. But more than that, there was Jaden. He was old enough to understand that nothing in life came for free, that there was always a catch, and that no one could be trusted entirely. Even though he had agreed to give Richard's offer a chance, I knew he was questioning it, just like I was. It was Thursday when Richard arrived again, his timing always impeccable. I had just finished making lunch for Jaden, who was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a book he had no intention of reading. The quiet between us had stretched longer than I liked, and I was starting to realize that my son was no longer a child in the way I thought he was. He was becoming a young man, full of questions I didn't know how to answer. Richard knocked softly, as if he was trying to respect the stillness in the house. I opened the door, already feeling that familiar mix of anticipation and doubt. "Morning, Angela." Richard greeted me, his smile just as warm as it had been the other day. I wondered if he could sense my nerves or if he simply had that kind of confidence that made people believe in him. Maybe it was that confidence that had allowed him to walk into our lives and offer something so difficult to accept. "Morning," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "We were just having lunch. Want some?" "I'm all right, thank you," he said, moving past me into the kitchen. His gaze flicked to Jaden, who had barely acknowledged his presence. "Hey, Jaden," Richard said, his voice calm, friendly. Jaden glanced up but didn't say anything. His eyes, though, said it all. He was still uncertain, still skeptical about this whole situation. "Jaden," I said softly, trying to break the silence. "Richard and I were talking about some ideas. Maybe it's time we get started." Jaden set his book down slowly and turned his chair to face us. I could tell he wasn't sure if he wanted to be part of this conversation, but he wasn't the kind of kid to walk away either. "Started on what?" he asked, his voice guarded. "What's the plan?" Richard looked at me before responding, as if giving me the space to decide how much to share. I appreciated that, but at the same time, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. Jaden deserved to know what was going on. "I think we're going to take Richard up on his offer," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was still beating a little faster than usual. He's offered to help us with some things, things I'm not sure we can do on our own right now. Jaden looked between us, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Help with what exactly? I hesitated, unsure of how to explain something that felt both too big and too small at the same time. I've been thinking about the future, Jaden. I know things have been tough. You've seen it and I've felt it. But I can't keep doing this on my own. We can't keep struggling just to get by. Jaden didn't respond right away, just staring at me, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to decide if he should trust what I was saying. I could feel the tension in the air, the unsaid words, the unshed questions. Richard spoke up then, as if sensing the unease between us. Angela's right, he said. I'm offering support, not just financially, but in ways that could give you both a chance to breathe. I want to help you set up something long term. I know it's hard to trust a stranger, but I think if you let me, I can make things easier. Jaden didn't seem convinced. Easier how? What's the catch? There it was, the question I had been waiting for, the one I didn't know how to answer. Richard paused, but his expression remained calm. No catch. It's not about doing something for me, Jaden. It's about giving you both the opportunity to stop worrying about surviving and start thinking about living. It was strange hearing Richard talk so openly about his intentions. It felt honest, but too good to be true. People didn't just offer help without expecting something, did they? I looked at Jaden, seeing the uncertainty written all over his face. I know it's a lot to take in, I said quietly, trying to reassure him, but sometimes it's okay to accept help. We don't have to carry everything ourselves. Jaden finally stood up from the table, his expression softening a little. I just don't want you to get hurt, Mom. We've done okay so far. I know, baby, I know, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But sometimes okay isn't enough. We've been fighting, and I'm tired of fighting alone. I don't want you to grow up in a world where the only thing we have to offer each other is struggle. Jaden didn't say anything more, but I saw something change in his eyes. Maybe he understood more than I realized. Maybe he was ready for this, too. Richard stood up then, offering a hand to Jaden. I'm not asking for trust right away, but I am asking for a chance for something better. Jaden looked at his hand, then back at me, as if waiting for me to say something more. I nodded once, giving him the silent reassurance he needed. Slowly, hesitantly, Jaden shook Richard's hand. The room felt lighter, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. After a moment of silence, Richard smiled. All right, that's a good start. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Richard helped me set up meetings with financial advisors, showing me how to restructure my finances, giving me advice on everything from budgeting to applying for grants. There was something about the way he worked, calm, methodical, always one step ahead, that made everything feel just a little less overwhelming. Jaden at first kept his distance, but as the days passed, he started asking more questions. His natural curiosity kicked in, and soon he was sitting in on the meetings, listening, learning. The change wasn't immediate, but it was happening. Slowly, our house started to feel like a place where hope could grow again. I still had doubts, still questioned whether we were doing the right thing. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't doing this alone. And that, in itself, was a step forward. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with an accountant Richard had set up for us, Jaden and I sat on the couch, the sound of the television filling the empty spaces between us. He looked at me, his face more relaxed than it had been in weeks. You know, Mom, he said, his voice thoughtful, I think Richard might actually be on our side. I mean, I wasn't sure at first, but I can see it now. He really wants to help. I smiled, my heart lifting at the sound of his words. Yeah, I think he does, and so do I, Jaden, so do I. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for us that didn't look quite so bleak. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with each small step, we were getting closer to something better. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like it was okay to hope. The weeks that followed felt like a strange kind of limbo. I had no idea whether Richard's help was truly the miracle it seemed to be, or if I was simply being lulled into a false sense of security. Every day, I found myself walking a thin line between gratitude and suspicion. Richard was everywhere offering advice, setting up meetings, helping me navigate the bureaucratic mess I'd spent years avoiding. At first, it felt like a gift, like someone finally saw us, really saw us, and wanted to make things better. But soon, I started wondering what it would cost us in the end. Jaden had started to loosen up around Richard. The cold distance that had marked their early interactions was slowly thawing, though I could see the hesitation still linger in my son's eyes. He was trying to trust Richard, but I could tell he was just as skeptical as I was. I don't think Jaden fully understood why Richard was offering so much help, but he was starting to see the changes in our lives. Things were easier now, more manageable. We weren't behind on bills anymore. I could finally pay for small luxuries I hadn't been able to afford in years, like new shoes for Jaden and a coat for myself. It felt good, but at the same time, it felt too easy. And easy was something I'd long since lost the luxury of. I spent more time with Richard in the following weeks than I had with anyone in years. He made himself available to us, always showing up at just the right moments, always with a solution for every problem. I couldn't deny that he had a way of making everything seem simple, but every time I felt myself getting comfortable, there was this nagging voice in the back of my mind, telling me to be careful, to question everything. It was a Thursday morning when the first crack appeared, small but undeniable. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, and sorting through the bills for the month when the phone rang. I recognized the number. It was Richard. He'd been helping me with some paperwork for a grant application I had submitted, and I'd been expecting his call. I picked up, trying to push the unease in my stomach aside. Angela, it's Richard. His voice was calm but had an edge to it, something I hadn't heard before. I've got the news on that grant application. I sat up straighter, setting my coffee down. And, it's good news, he said quickly. They've approved the application, but there's a catch. They want a matching investment from you, something significant. I wasn't expecting this, but it's part of the deal. I felt my stomach drop. The grant I'd applied for was supposed to give us the breathing room we needed, a way to start over, but now it seemed like it was just another way to pull us into something bigger. What kind of matching investment? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the tension rising. It's not a small amount, Richard replied. But if you're willing to move forward, I think we can make this work. I have access to a few investors who can back you, but I'd need your approval on this first. My mind was spinning. I had no idea what matching investment meant, but it didn't sound like something I could afford, even with all the help Richard had given me. I couldn't imagine tying us to something that big, not with the uncertainty still hanging over us. I don't know, Richard. I said, my voice quiet. This feels like a lot. We haven't even had a chance to really figure things out yet. I understand, Richard said quickly. But you have to understand this is the next step. We can't keep playing it small, Angela. If you want real change, we have to take risks. I believe in you, in what you can do with this, but it's going to take more than just surviving. You have to be ready to take the leap. His words, though well intended, hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. Now, it was about risking everything to step into a world I didn't fully understand. I didn't want to gamble with Jaden's future, not like this. I'll need some time, I said, my voice low, almost to myself. This is a lot to think about. Of course, Richard replied, his tone softer now. Take your time, Angela, but I just want you to know I'm here to help, whatever you decide. We'll move forward together. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking slightly as I set it down on the counter. The room felt too quiet, too heavy. I had been so grateful for Richard's help, but now I was starting to feel like I had been led down a path I wasn't sure I wanted to follow. What if this was just another way for Richard to pull us into something that would cost us more than we were ready to pay? Jaden walked in a few minutes later, his face still tired from the early morning, but his presence seemed to fill the room with warmth. He was still adjusting to everything, Richard's help, the changes in our lives, but at least he wasn't fighting me on it anymore. Who was that? He asked, rubbing his eyes. It was Richard, I said, my voice still tinged with uncertainty. He told me about the grant. There's a catch, Jaden. We'd need to match the investment ourselves, and it's a lot of money. I don't know if we can do it. Jaden sat down across from me, folding his arms as he leaned back in his chair. He looked thoughtful, almost older than his 16 years. I think we should do it, he said slowly, his voice steady. I mean, I know it sounds scary, but maybe this is what we need. Maybe this is our chance to finally move forward. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a while. His eyes were full of hope, a hope I wasn't sure I could share, but I could see the shift in him. He wasn't just following me anymore. He was starting to see the possibility of something better. I don't know, Jaden, I said, my voice heavy with doubt. What if this is too much? What if we're getting in over our heads? Jaden didn't answer right away. He just sat there, staring at the empty space between us as if weighing the risks just like I was. Finally, he spoke. Maybe it's time we stopped playing it safe, he said. Maybe it's time to take a chance. I looked at him, feeling both proud and terrified. He was right. He was starting to understand the bigger picture, even if I didn't want to admit it. But as I stared out the window at the quiet street, I couldn't help but wonder if we were really ready to take that step. Was I ready to let go of the control I'd held onto for so long, to place our future in someone else's hands, even if that someone seemed to have our best interests at heart? I wasn't sure. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't facing this uncertainty alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to make me believe that we could survive whatever came next. All right, I said finally, my voice steady but uncertain. We'll do it, we'll take the chance. Jaden's eyes brightened and I felt the weight of his gaze on me. But deep down, I knew that this was the first step towards something bigger, something better, whether we were ready or not. The path was in front of us, and there was no turning back now. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and a constant hum of anxiety that sat like a weight in my chest. Richard was everywhere. He had become a constant presence in our lives, on the phone, in our home, in our thoughts. And even though he was always offering solutions, always one step ahead of us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something we couldn't control. Jaden seemed to handle the pressure better than I did. Every time I looked at him, he was more focused, more determined. It was as though he believed in this, believed in Richard's vision for our future more than I did. He took to the meetings with a kind of quiet confidence, listening intently, asking questions that surprised me. There was a time when I would have been the one holding the reins, making the decisions, but now Jaden was stepping up. It was his future, too, and for the first time, I could see the weight of that responsibility on his shoulders. But there were cracks. Small, almost imperceptible things at first. I noticed Richard's increasing involvement in the details of our lives, his subtle suggestions on what we should buy, how we should invest, even where we should go for groceries. It was as if he was orchestrating our every move, guiding us toward decisions that felt right in the moment, but left me wondering if they were truly what we needed. The turning point came a few days after we had signed the agreement to match the grant investment. Richard had come over to finalize some paperwork, but when he stepped inside, there was something in his eyes, something that made my stomach churn. He was all business as usual, but there was an undercurrent to his demeanor, a weight in the air that I couldn't ignore. Angela, Richard began, his voice smooth and practiced, I've been looking over some of your financials, and I think there's something we need to address. You need to take some risks to see the full potential of what we're doing here, and I think you're ready. I stood frozen in the doorway of the kitchen, the coffee cup in my hand suddenly feeling heavier. I had learned to take risks, yes, but not like this. Not this kind of risk. Not when it felt like we were walking blindfolded into the unknown. Take some risks? I asked, my voice faltering before I could stop it. What do you mean? Richard smiled, but there was something sharp behind it now, something I hadn't seen before. You've already committed, Angela. You can't pull back now. If you really want this to work, you need to be willing to go all in. Trust me. Trust him. The words hung in the air and my gut twisted. I had trusted Richard, perhaps too much, too soon. He had shown me a way out, but now it felt like I was being pushed down a path I hadn't agreed to. I had been so desperate for change, so eager to believe that this was the way forward, but now? Now I wasn't so sure. I don't think I'm ready for that, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. This is already too much. We've already stretched ourselves thin. Richard's expression hardened just for a moment, but long enough for me to see the shift. You don't understand, Angela. This is how it works. You take risks or you lose everything. You can't keep playing it safe. You've committed, you can't back out now. The words stung more than I expected, and I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about control. This was about whether or not Richard believed I had the ability to make my own choices, or if he had already decided what was best for me. And worse, I realized he was trying to make me believe it too. I could feel the walls closing in, the pressure of his words pushing me towards something I wasn't ready for. I don't want to risk everything, I said, my voice shaking, but I wasn't sure if it was the fear in my words or the anger that was starting to build up. Not like this, not when I don't know what's on the other side. Richard's smile faltered for the first time, and I saw something cold behind his eyes. You don't have a choice, he said, his voice lowering. You're already in this, Angela, and now you'll have to see it through, whether you like it or not. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, and I knew that something between us had shifted. Richard wasn't just helping us anymore. He wasn't offering guidance. He was taking control, and for the first time I realized that I had allowed him to. Jaden had been listening from the living room, and when he came into the kitchen, he looked between us, sensing the tension that hung in the air. Is everything okay? He asked, his voice uncertain. I didn't answer right away. How could I explain this to him? How could I explain that the help I had thought was a lifeline was now feeling like a trap? Richard turned to Jaden, his demeanor shifting back to the polished businessman I had come to know. Everything's fine, Jaden. We're just having a conversation. Your mom and I are just working through some details, that's all. I could see Jaden's eyes narrow, the same skepticism I had seen in him 1,000 times before flickering across his face. He wasn't blind. He had seen how much Richard had been involved in our lives, and I knew he was starting to feel the weight of it, too. I don't know if I like the sound of that, Jaden said quietly, his tone cautious but firm. It sounds like more of the same. You keep saying everything's fine, but is it really? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I didn't know if everything was fine anymore. Richard had become such an integral part of our lives, I wasn't sure where his influence ended and ours began. Jaden, it's complicated, I said, my voice soft, trying to find the right words. Richard has been helping us, but maybe we've let it go too far. I don't know if I'm ready for the next step. Richard cleared his throat, but there was a hardness in his eyes now, the warmth of his smile gone. Angela, you've already made a commitment. You can't keep questioning this. The money is already invested. The next step is moving forward. I felt the weight of his words in my chest, suffocating me. This wasn't help anymore. This wasn't about moving forward. It was about control, about bending us to his will. I had let it happen, let myself believe that I could trust him, but now I was starting to see the truth. Jaden's voice broke through the tension again, this time stronger, more certain. I don't think we should do it, Mom. I don't think we should trust him anymore. I looked at my son, his words cutting through the fog in my mind. He was right. We couldn't trust Richard, not like this. Not when it felt like we were losing ourselves in the process. You're right, I said quietly, my voice steady now. We've taken enough risks. It's time to take a step back. Richard looked at me, his expression hardening, but I stood firm. I had allowed him to guide us, to influence our decisions, but now it was time to reclaim what was ours. We're done here, Richard, I said, my voice calm but unwavering. I won't let you take us down a path we're not ready for. Not anymore. There was a long pause before Richard spoke again, his voice tight with frustration. You'll regret this, Angela. You can't turn back now. I'll take that chance, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. We'll figure it out on our own. Richard stood there for a long moment, his eyes locked on mine. Finally, he nodded, turning to leave without another word. As the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread wash over me. We were at a crossroads now, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was choosing to take control, choosing to fight for what we deserved. And whatever happened next, I knew we'd be ready. The silence in the house after Richard left was almost deafening. The air felt different now, thicker, heavier, but somehow freer. I stood there for a few moments, unsure of what came next. I had just made the decision to step away from the path Richard had laid before us, but now, with the door closed behind him, there was no going back. I wasn't sure what we were going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. We had taken control of our own lives again. Jaden was sitting on the couch, his face pensive. I could see the questions in his eyes, the uncertainty. He hadn't said much during Richard's visit, but now, as I stood in the quiet room, I could feel the weight of everything he was processing. I sat down beside him, not sure how to break the silence. For so long, I had been focused on surviving, on getting through each day, and hoping that somehow tomorrow would be easier. But now, it felt like I was standing at the edge of something new, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Mom, Jaden said, his voice low, breaking the stillness. Are you sure we made the right choice? I mean, I get why you did it, but what now? What happens next? I looked at my son, the one person who had been with me through everything, the struggles, the doubts, the constant fight to keep us afloat, and I saw the uncertainty in his eyes. He had always been the one to ground me, to remind me of what was important when I started losing myself in the chaos. And now, I had to remind him that we could still build something better, even without Richard's help. I don't know, Jaden, I said, my voice a little more fragile than I wanted it to be. But I do know one thing. We've been scraping by for so long, but we're more than just survivors. We can do more than this. We don't need to rely on anyone else to get ahead. Jaden looked at me, his expression softening. I don't want us to end up where we were before, but I get it. Maybe we can figure this out on our own. I don't want you to feel like you have to do everything alone, Mom. The words hung in the air between us, simple but powerful. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just trying to keep Jaden afloat. We were both in this together, both figuring out how to rebuild from the ground up. The next few days were a whirlwind of action. There was no more waiting around for someone else to fix our problems. I reached out to a few people I knew, community leaders, friends who had always been there when I needed them, and started asking questions. I applied for new job opportunities, updated my resume, and even reached out to some local businesses to see if they needed help. It wasn't easy, and I could feel the weight of every decision I made, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in charge of my own future. Jaden helped too, in his own way. He spent hours researching scholarships, looking up programs that could help him with college applications. We weren't entirely out of the woods, but we were taking the first steps toward something better. One afternoon, I was sitting at the kitchen table, going over a list of job openings, when Jaden walked in, holding something in his hands. Mom, he said, his voice excited. I think I found something. There's a local program for young entrepreneurs. It helps kids like me who want to start their own businesses. They offer mentorship, a small grant to get started, and they even help with setting up a business plan. I think we should apply. I looked up from my papers, a little surprised. Jaden had always been resourceful, but I hadn't expected him to dive into something so ambitious so quickly. You think you're ready for that? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, though I could feel a burst of pride swelling inside me. Starting a business isn't easy, you know. I know, he said, sitting down across from me. But I've been thinking about it. Maybe this is the opportunity we need. I've seen how hard you work, how much you sacrifice for us. Maybe it's time we do something for ourselves, not just to get by, but to actually build something that's ours. The words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized it before, but Jaden was right. We hadn't been building, we had just been surviving. And now he wanted to build something real, something that wasn't dependent on someone else's charity or handouts. The idea of him starting a business was both terrifying and inspiring. You're right, I said, my voice steady. It's time we started building. We'll do it together. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late nights spent putting together applications, business plans, and budgets. Jaden's business idea was simple but ambitious. He wanted to start an online business selling custom-designed t-shirts. He had always been creative, always drawing designs in notebooks, and now he was channeling that energy into something that could help us both. It wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme, but it was a start. And sometimes starting is all you need. We applied for the program, sent in the paperwork, and waited. The uncertainty hung over us, but it wasn't the same kind of suffocating uncertainty we had lived with before. This was different. This was hope. This was action. During this time, I found a part-time job at a local cafe, something I hadn't expected to do, but it was a steady income. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a step in the right direction. It gave me a chance to get out of the house, meet new people, and begin to rebuild my own sense of purpose. Jaden's entrepreneurial spirit was contagious, and his drive pushed me to keep going, to keep fighting, even when I felt like giving up. One afternoon, we got the news Jaden's application had been accepted into the entrepreneur program. We were officially starting a business. I couldn't stop smiling as I hugged him, my heart full of pride and disbelief. This was the moment I had been hoping for. This was the future we had been working toward. We did it, Jaden said, his voice barely above a whisper. We really did it. We did, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. And we're just getting started. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a future. Not one built on handouts or someone else's promises, but one built on our own strength, our own ambition. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew that together, we could make it happen. We had taken control of our own lives, and we were finally ready to rebuild. As the weeks turned into months, things began to take shape in ways I hadn't imagined. The days were still filled with uncertainty, but there was a new rhythm to our lives now, an energy that hadn't been there before. Jaden's business was off the ground, small but growing, and my part-time job at the cafe provided just enough to keep us afloat. We were working harder than ever, but for the first time, it didn't feel like we were just spinning our wheels. We were building something real. Jaden threw himself into his business, learning how to design t-shirts, set up an online store, and market his products. He spent hours in front of his laptop, researching, watching tutorials, and perfecting his designs. I'd always known he had a creative streak, but seeing him transform that into a business was something I hadn't expected. It was inspiring, watching him take control of his future like this, and it gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, I could see a future where we weren't just surviving. We were living. The grant, the mentorship, Jaden's business, everything was falling into place step by step. And I couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of life we had been waiting for all along. But as much as I wanted to believe in our progress, there was always something lurking beneath the surface. It was a constant, nagging feeling that I couldn't quite shake. We had worked hard to get to this point, but the road ahead was still long. Every decision felt like a risk, and every step forward felt like we were walking on the edge of a cliff. The pressure was building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something would test our resolve. It came one evening after work, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through the new business orders Jaden had received that day. The doorbell rang, and I stood up to answer it, expecting nothing more than a neighbor or perhaps another delivery for the business. But when I opened the door, I was met with the last person I expected to see. "Richard," I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" He stood there on the doorstep, looking just as calm and collected as ever, his smile almost too smooth. But there was something different about him now, something colder, something that made the air around us feel even heavier. "I think we need to talk," Richard said, his voice steady but with an underlying edge that sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, feeling the weight of the decision hanging over me. "Now, Richard, we've already—" "I know," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "But there are things you don't understand, Angela, things you need to hear." I looked past him, wondering if I was making a mistake by even entertaining this conversation. But something in his eyes, a glint that hadn't been there before, made me pause. I didn't want to invite him inside, didn't want to hear whatever it was he had to say. But the past few months had been full of change, and despite everything, a part of me still wondered if there was more to this story than I understood. "Come in," I said, stepping aside reluctantly. Richard walked in, and I shut the door behind him, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that was creeping over me. Jaden was in his room, no doubt working on his designs, but I didn't want him to be caught in the middle of whatever this was. We sat down at the kitchen table, and Richard wasted no time getting to the point. "I've been looking into things, Angela," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I've been watching you, watching how quickly Jaden's business is growing. I think you're both on the right track, but you're missing something. You're still playing small. You're not seeing the bigger picture." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean by that?" "We're doing fine, Richard. We're working hard. Jaden's business is growing, and I'm doing everything I can to support him." Richard's eyes narrowed, and I saw that familiar coldness creep into his expression. "It's not enough, not if you really want to get ahead. And I think you know that. You're still too focused on doing things on your own. I could help you take this to the next level. All I need is your trust." The words hit me like a slap in the face. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The anger, the frustration, the confusion, it all rose up inside me, threatening to spill over. He had been the one to push us into this, the one who had made it seem like we were making progress, and now he was telling me it wasn't enough. "We don't need your help, Richard," I finally said, my voice steady but laced with anger. "We've been doing this on our own. And we're making it work. You had your chance, and we don't owe you anything." Richard didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand. I'm offering you a way out of all this. A way for Jaden to grow his business faster, for you to have everything you've ever wanted. But if you keep refusing my help, you'll never get there. You'll always be stuck in the same cycle." "Maybe that's where we want to be," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Maybe we're tired of being pushed into something we're not ready for. This is our life. Richard, not yours, and we don't need you telling us what we need." There was a long silence between us, the tension thick in the air. Richard's smile faded, and for a moment I saw something else, something dangerous, something that made my blood run cold. But just as quickly it was gone, replaced by that practiced calm. "Fine," he said, standing up. "You'll regret this, but don't say I didn't warn you." He turned to leave, and I didn't stop him. I stood there in the kitchen, my hands clenched at my sides, trying to steady my breathing. The door closed behind him, and for a moment I was alone again, the weight of his words hanging in the air like smoke. Later that evening, Jaden came downstairs, his face full of questions. I hadn't told him about the conversation with Richard yet, but I could see that he sensed something was off. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, sitting down next to me. What did Richard want? I looked at him, seeing the same confusion in his eyes that I had felt myself. For so long, I had tried to protect him from the weight of all the decisions I was making. But now, he was part of it all. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that we were truly in this together. "Richard came by to talk about the business," I said, my voice steady. "He's been pushing us, Jaden, telling us we need to take bigger risks, do things his way. But I don't think that's the right path for us." Jaden nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he processed my words. "I agree, it feels like he's trying to control everything, doesn't it?" "It does," I said quietly. "But we're not going down that road anymore. We've got this, Jaden. We've made it this far, and we'll keep going without anyone else's influence." Jaden looked at me, his expression softening. "I'm with you, Mom. Whatever happens, we're in this together." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something, something that was ours. And no matter what happened, we would face it together. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but we were ready for it. We had each other, and that was enough. It wasn't long after Richard's visit that I began to feel the weight of his words lingering in the back of my mind. He had made it seem so simple, so easy to take the next step. But every part of me resisted the idea. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. We weren't ready for the kind of life he was offering. That wasn't our path. We were learning how to stand on our own 2 feet, and no one, not even Richard, could take that from us. I woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. There was still a long way to go and plenty of hurdles to clear, but I could feel the change in the air. Jaden had made progress with his t-shirt business, his designs were getting better, and people were starting to take notice. It wasn't a huge leap yet, but it was a start. A real one. The day was crisp and clear, the sun shining through the windows, casting warm rays over the kitchen table where I sat with my coffee, going over Jaden's order list for the week. The numbers were still small, but they were growing. Slowly but surely, we were building something that had the potential to turn into more. Jaden walked in, his usual energy filling the room as he rubbed his eyes and stretched. He was always up early, ready to dive into his work. That was one of the things I admired most about him, his drive, his ambition. Despite everything we'd been through, he was still hungry for more, hungry for success. "Morning, Mom," he said, grabbing a mug and pouring himself some coffee. "You look like you've got something on your mind." I smiled up at him, feeling the weight of the decision I'd made yesterday settling into place. "I do actually. I've been thinking about something." "Oh," he said, grinning as he sat down across from me. That tone always means something big is coming. I laughed softly, shaking my head. It's nothing too dramatic, I promise. I've just been thinking about how we've been doing things, and I think it's time we push a little harder. Jaden raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Push harder, what do you mean? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I know we've been taking things one step at a time, but I think we've got more potential than we realize. We've been playing it safe for too long, trying to get by with small steps. But if we really want to make this work, we need to think bigger. We need to take risks, real ones. Jaden leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. So, you mean, what? Like go bigger with the business? More designs? Maybe even a website? Exactly, I said, my voice firm now. We've been doing great, but I think we need to invest in the future. We've got a good thing going, but it won't get far if we don't take that next step. I've been looking into options, and there's a local small business accelerator program. It could give you the mentorship you need to really scale up, but it'll require a financial commitment and a bigger investment of your time. It's a risk, but it's the kind of risk we need. Jaden's face lit up, the excitement clear in his eyes. That sounds amazing, Mom, but what's the catch? You said it requires an investment. How much are we talking about here? I hesitated for a moment, knowing that what I was about to say would set the stage for what would come next. It's not cheap, Jaden. It's a few $1,000s to get started, but I think it's worth it. We'll need to pull together some savings, maybe take out a small loan, but this could be the thing that really sets us apart. We could get the kind of exposure you need to make this a real business. Jaden sat back in his chair, thinking. I could see the wheels turning in his head. This wasn't just a small decision. It was a big one, but I also knew that he understood what this meant. It wasn't just about the money. It was about believing in the potential of what we were building. Do you really think we can make it work? He asked, looking at me with the kind of trust that only a child can give. I nodded. I do. It's not going to be easy and it won't happen overnight, but I believe in what we're doing. And I believe in you. We've come so far already, Jaden. We've learned how to fight for what we need. This is just the next step. He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him wrestling with the idea. He had always been cautious, much like me, and I knew the idea of taking on debt and committing more of our limited resources was a big step. But then he smiled, a real, genuine smile, and I knew he was in. Let's do it, he said, his voice full of determination. Let's take the risk. The application for the Business Accelerator program was a long and detailed process, but Jaden worked tirelessly on it, putting together a proposal, business plan, and vision for the next year. Every night after school, he was at the computer, tweaking his pitch and researching ways to grow the business. I helped with what I could, offering advice on the financial side and making sure we had everything in place. It felt like we were building something from nothing, one small brick at a time. But with each step, it felt more and more like we were laying the foundation for something real. When the acceptance letter finally came, we both stared at it in silence for a few seconds before Jaden let out a whoop of joy. I grabbed him in a hug, the reality of it finally sinking in. We had done it. We had pushed ourselves to take the next step, and it was paying off. The accelerator program was a huge opportunity, one that would give Jaden the mentorship, resources, and networking he needed to truly take his business to the next level. But with that excitement came a new pressure. The program wasn't free, and while we had saved a little, the financial commitment was still daunting. The loan we were considering was something I hadn't thought about seriously until now, but we needed the capital to get started. It felt like we were taking a leap of faith, but I was ready for it. I had to be. We had come too far to back down now. As we prepared to enter the program, I realized something profound. We were no longer just surviving. We were building. This wasn't a life of scraping by, it was a life of possibility. It was messy, uncertain, and full of risks, but it was ours. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the cusp of something great. The next few months were a whirlwind. The program was challenging and the learning curve was steep, but we both threw ourselves into it with everything we had. Jaden grew in ways I couldn't have imagined, learning not just about business, but about what it meant to be a leader, a creator, someone who could make a difference. And I was right there beside him, supporting him every step of the way. But more than that, we were doing it together, and that was the real victory. We had found our footing, and no matter what came next, we were ready to face it. Months passed, and with each passing day, the business began to grow faster than either of us had expected. The mentorship program proved invaluable. Jaden received guidance from experienced entrepreneurs who had once been where he was, starting with nothing, driven by a passion for their craft, and learning the hard lessons that come with it. The accelerator connected him to a community of young, ambitious people who were just as eager to build something from scratch. They exchanged ideas, collaborated on projects, and pushed each other to think bigger. At the same time, I continued to work at the cafe, and the financial burden slowly began to lift. We were no longer living paycheck to paycheck. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, I could breathe without the constant pressure in my chest. Every step we took felt like it was moving us closer to the future we had dreamed about. The risk we had taken in applying for the Business Accelerator program was paying off. We were no longer just two people trying to scrape by. We were a small but growing business with the potential to scale, to build a life we could be proud of. Jaden's designs were becoming more popular, and the online orders were starting to trickle in steadily. He had set up a social media page for the business where he posted photos of his designs, behind the scenes shots of the creation process, and inspirational quotes that resonated with the kind of work ethic he wanted to inspire. It wasn't just about selling t shirts anymore. It was about creating a brand, a message that spoke to other people like him, people who believed in doing things the right way, people who weren't afraid to take chances. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with Jaden, going over some new designs, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had transformed before my eyes, from a young boy trying to find his way into a young man building his own future. His growth wasn't just about business. It was about character, about resilience, about seeing beyond the obstacles and believing in the possibilities. And I had done the same. For so long, I had been caught in the idea of surviving. But now I understood that living, really living, meant embracing the risk, embracing the unknown, and working hard to build something worth having. Mom, Jaden said one night, breaking me from my thoughts, I've been thinking about where we're going next. What's our next big move? I looked at him, not surprised by the question. It was the same question that had been burning in my mind as well. I think we need to keep pushing, Jaden. Maybe it's time to start thinking about expanding, getting a small studio space, printing more designs, maybe even looking at new markets. But most of all, we need to stay true to why we started this. We're building something that's ours. We don't want to lose sight of that. He nodded, a smile creeping onto his face. I'm with you, whatever it takes, we'll do it together. And that's when I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that we were ready. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The road ahead was still uncertain, but that was the beauty of it. We had a future now, a real one, one built on hard work, trust, and love. As I sit here today, reflecting on everything that has happened, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Our journey hasn't been easy. There have been moments of doubt, of fear, and of struggle. But there has also been growth, and in that growth, there's been a quiet, enduring strength. I've learned that nothing is ever truly handed to you. You have to work for it, you have to believe in it, and sometimes you have to take risks. To everyone who has supported us along the way, to those who believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves, thank you. Your encouragement, your kindness, your faith in us has made all the difference. To my son, Jaden, you are my heart, my inspiration, and my reason for fighting every day. Watching you grow into the young man you are has been the greatest gift of all. I am proud of you, not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you are, your heart, your spirit, your passion. I couldn't have asked for a better partner in this journey. And to all of you reading this, thank you for being a part of our story. I hope it serves as a reminder that it's never too late to start over, to take a risk, to believe in yourself and your dreams. No matter where you are in your journey, no matter what obstacles you face, remember, you are capable, you are strong, and you are never alone. As we continue to build, as we continue to move forward, I wish you all health, happiness, and love. May your families be strong, your hearts full, and your journeys filled with hope. Here's to the road ahead. Thank you, and may you always find light on your paths.